Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Fries, and today I will be talking about The Man Who Was Almost a Man by Richard Wright. As most of you have read, it is a short story about an African American male named Dave. Dave is a young worker on a farm in the South who works hard for his money but wants to be respected for he is a man, he says. He claims nothing else will make him more of a man than having a gun of his own. Today, the major aspect of this story that I will be focusing on is Richard Wright's upbringing. Why would he write about the character Dave and the man who was almost a man? I will also mention why he chose the writing style he did and the setting of the story. There are many important deeper meanings behind this literature, far beyond a boy who wants a gun. Today, we will take a deeper dive into why that may be. Today, some of the key points that make this work of literature that much better was the author's choice of writing. Therefore, this work sparks up conversations about characterization, why Dave may represent more than just a character, geographic differences, the way the land or lifestyle can impact someone, social differences, which can be race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, age, religion, ability, and class, cultural tradition, how different states or areas can be contrasting than others, setting description, how time, place, and atmosphere can play a huge part in literature. To get started, it is important to know and understand the background of Richard Wright and why his own life can be seen in aspects of this story, or why he may have chosen to go about this in certain ways that he did. So, with that being said, let's get into it. Why did he choose Dave as the main character? So, looking back on Richard Wright's childhood, he had moved around a lot, moving from Roxy, Mississippi to Memphis, Tennessee to Arkansas, back to Jackson, Mississippi. He was all over the South. Throughout this whole time, in his very young years, he was working hard to take care of himself and his family. This can definitely be related to Dave in the story, working hard at a very young age so he can support himself and his family. Both of his parents worked hard too, but in the atmosphere Richard Wright and Dave were raised up in, they were expected to provide early on. This can be brought back to Wright's roots of working hard at a very young age to support his family as well as his future goals and aspirations. At various times, Wright was known to work 2 or even 3 jobs, some of them while going to school. So, with that being said, that would be one of the sole causes of Richard Wright's intent for characterization in this short story. He had many of the same responsibilities as Dave when he was around the same age. He can relate directly to the protagonist in this work, Dave. Additionally, in this story, Dave is struggling with wanting to be a man. He wants to be grown. He wants to be independent. He wants to do things that men can do. Like I mentioned in the beginning, a crucial point of the story is Dave wanting to get himself a gun and be a man. This can be directly related to Richard Wright's upbringing. He was faced with many challenges in his life, such as segregation, lack of respect, all because he was an African American in the South in the early 1900s. From the moment Wright was born, he was not treated fairly. With Jim Crow laws coming out in the specific era, many African Americans in the South could not participate in certain activities and do many things that whites could do. Many things that Dave experienced, Richard Wright had also experienced in some way, shape, or form. This is a form of symbolism that the author is speaking through once you learn more about Richard Wright and his background. If you think back to the modernist manifestos, Richard Wright was definitely following the ideation of it by bringing out more feelings and creativity, leaving the old style of audience thinking behind. At the time the story was released in 1940, Richard Wright was a very well known author, especially amongst the African American community. Many would argue that in that time period, he was the most famous and well respected in the United States of America. He would then go on to influence numerous younger black writers as well. Many people knew who he was, knew his background, and respected him greatly. So for this story, which originally came out in 1940, this was a way for him to talk about aspects of his childhood through Dave as an analogy, and for people to understand and relate to the words he had written. An analogy on the bigger picture of African Americans in the South. One of the most interesting aspects of this story is how it can relate to historic events such as segregation, racism, and Jim Crow laws in the early 1900s. Many folks understood at the time that it was released. What is cool about it is it does not even say one word about these events. It is a story that focuses on one small story, but has multiple deeper meanings under the surface. That was the idea of modernist manifestos. Another key aspect that we'll be focusing on today is, why did Richard Wright choose the writing style that he wrote? Well, right off the bat, you can tell that this writing is different in this story than what we are usually used to reading today. This story can be harder to read than most. This writing style also ties into Wright's childhood, so we will compare Richard Wright's upbringing here as well. Wright was born in the deep, deep South in Roxy, Mississippi. He was born from a school teacher, his mother, and a sharecropper, his father. His mother, Ella, had grandparents who were slaves. His father could not read or write and was not the best with proper English as well. Therefore, Richard Wright was brought up hearing improper English from a culture in the deep South, which we all know can be hard to understand sometimes with their thick accents. Even in Virginia, some people we encounter may still have accents that we may not fully understand or comprehend all the time. To continue, Mississippi has a lot of terminology that the South as a whole does not use, such as "suh," meaning sir, which is seen many times throughout the story. Additionally, you read a few derogatory terms throughout various parts of this work. That shows the times Richard Wright was brought up in within the early 1900s, hearing racist terms, slangs, words that should not be said today. Where and when Richard Wright grew up, these were things that were said very frequently. Richard Wright grew up in this culture. He had been around this accent for most of his younger years, all the way until he moved to Chicago in 1927. So, by referring to Dave as himself in this story, like we talked about earlier, the style of writing accurately represents his childhood as well as many African Americans in the South during this time frame. This style of text and showing the accent through the work accurately describes whereabout in America this takes place. Also, at the time period this was released, many in the South could understand this writing probably easier than proper English. It made the work relatable to the culture of those in the South. All that we have talked about today are key factors in describing the setting, culture, and characterization of the story. The language that is written easily tells the American reader the geographic which the story takes place in expresses multiple different emotions, and lets the reader zone in on the deeper meanings that this story can tell. So, going back to the modernist manifesto's ideas for this, additionally, by choosing this writing style, Wright had the same tendencies as those in modernist manifestos, if not better. Before them, you would not see popular works that were hard to read because of the culture and the settings they were in. This literature is a glowing representation of the modernist ideation by showing culture, social difference, and characterization based on where they're from in America. Some key takeaways from this story is Dave is a young African American character working hard on the farmland in the South. Richard Wright, growing up in the South after being born in 1908, faced many similar challenges very young, such as wanting to be independent, growing up in the same culture, same atmosphere, very young. Wright was able to put deeper thoughts and tradition into this literature by living through it in his own life. Therefore, he was able to reach many other audiences, such as the African American community, who also shared experiences like Wright. Along with this, Wright embraced modernism and in American literature by creating his own style, where he could have a very diverse audience and provide outreach to many across the country and in the South. Thank you all for tuning in. This is Matthew Freeze. My works cited are on the next page. Thank you. This is my works cited page. There's 2 Richard Wright biographies and the story itself, The Man Who Was Almost a Man. The last 4 are going to be images, the images that I used that you guys saw as my presentational aids. Thank you.